Step inside this timber frame barn in western Massachusetts and you step into another world. Here you are enveloped by the sweet fragrance of fermented grains. The early morning air inside is warm. It's the perfect temperature for making miso. Miso, a delicious all-purpose high-protein ingredient, has played a major role in Japanese culture and cuisine for centuries. Christian Elwell is the owner of South River Miso. Making miso has been a love of his for 20 years.
Miso is a seasoning with the consistency of a paste, and it's used primarily to season soup. But in addition to being a seasoning for flavor, it's loaded with microorganisms that aid in the digestion of whatever other foods we eat.
The ingredient list for miso is simple: cooked beans, fermented grains, and sea salt.
The primary bean that is used to make miso is the soybean, and the primary grains are either rice or barley. But one could use any grain and one could use any bean.
While most scholars say miso originated in Japan, some believe it was introduced there from China in the 6th century AD.
Miso goes back in history, at least 2,000 years. But it first became solidified as miso as we know it now around 800 AD in the first millennium.
There are two main steps in the miso making process. The first begins here over a wood fire. After soaking overnight, the grain is steamed. A few hours later, it's cooled and prepared for fermentation.
Now what we need to do is to cool the grain down to 112 degrees, at which point we'll be able to inoculate it with the spores of the Aspergillus.
Aspergillus is a group of molds which is found worldwide, especially in the autumn and winter in the northern hemisphere. The spores are first mixed into a small tray of cooled grain and then sown throughout the batch. Now the fermentation begins and the grain becomes known as koji.
In modern times, the value and even the existence of fermented foods has pretty much been lost, and we need them in order to help maintain and to create a healthy, vigorous digestive system.
The koji is put into cribs and stays warm overnight. In the morning, it's placed in trays where the fermentation process continues for another day.
And you can see the white covering that the koji has, the result of the mold growing on the grain.
Sea salt is added to the koji. This will give the miso a long shelf life. Meanwhile, the second part of the process is underway. Cooked beans are readied for treading. Christian is one of the few who still employs ancient methods.
In foot coverings, we use, these are organic socks, organic cotton socks. So the beans are so soft that they will crush underfoot. Psychologically, as a miso maker or as a food maker, doing this, one feels a really integral part of the food making process in a way that is otherwise not possible. So the whole technology of the shop, of the process itself is all comes from the desire or the intention originally to make a food that can really serve the health and well-being of human beings.
After 20 minutes of treading, the koji is added to the crushed beans.
Here they're being brought together, so it's kind of a wedding ceremony. And from this point on, they're never going to be the same. The beans will no longer be beans and the rice will no longer rice, but they're going to come together and they're going to be miso.
One of the virtues of a good miso maker is patience. The brown rice recipe being made here today will be stored in wooden vats where it will continue to ferment for at least 3 years.
One of the most appealing aspects of miso is its wonderful taste. It has a rich, nourishing, hearty flavor. The darker varieties, which are aged for a long time, have an almost meat-like flavor. The lighter varieties, which are aged for a shorter time, are a sweet taste and are wonderful, like for salad dressings and so forth. Making miso in the way that we do, by hand and following the traditional craft, really involves the human being in the process in a way which is otherwise not possible. And to know that that food is then going into the bloodstream of humanity, and we like to think bringing healing forces to all our relations.